Just recently, I posted a picture online of a carved spiral that I made, and the response was incredible. So many people want to know how it's done and how they can incorporate it into their work. So ask and you shall receive. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to carve a spiral. Now this carving was originally intended as an alternative post option for the tilt-top table project that we're building in the guild right now. The table design features a turned post, as you would expect, and the thing is, not everybody has a lathe, right? So I thought it would be cool to show some alternatives, and this was one of them. Now this technique is something that goes back to an old Woodworks episode, Season 4. David Marks built a twisted lamp stand that featured a post just like this, obviously a little bit longer. And even back then, I was excited about the technique. I went into the shop, grabbed a piece of zebra wood with the best intentions, and started to carve my spiral just like David did. Now, I never did anything with this post. I've just held on to it as an example and sample to keep around the shop for teaching purposes. But I think it's now time to take this design and actually do something with it. So that's where all this came from. But the thing is, this isn't my technique. I did have to ask permission from David to share it with you, and he said, of course. But I should probably mention that if you go to djmarks.com, you could actually buy entire seasons of Woodworks on DVD, and you could buy them digitally as well. Now, the one that this was featured in is Season 4, and that's not out yet. It should be out soon. But when it comes out, you are definitely going to want to pick it up. And in all seriousness, if you've never seen Woodworks, it is hands down the best woodworking show that has ever been made. And that's not to put anyone else down who makes woodworking shows, but for me, that's where it all started. It all goes back to Woodworks and David Marks. So with that, sort of honored to be able to show you this technique, let's jump in and carve a spiral. Here's a quick overview of the progression. We're going to start with a 2 by 2 by 8 solid block. Then we're going to round over all 4 corners to the point where we almost create a cylinder. And then we could do our carving. The thing is, you can make this as long as you want it to be, depending on what you plan on doing with it, but this one is really just going to be intended as a small candle stand. I really can't think of anything else to do with it right now, but this should do the trick. Something like this, all right? Not in love with that by any means, but you get the idea. This would be the post, and you could do just about anything you want with it. So let's start with our blank. I start by making center lines on each face and then extending those lines to the ends. This 1-inch radius bit means business, so I set it initially for a light cut and route all 4 sides. I then raise the bit and repeat the routing process. Eventually, you'll want to get to a point where you only have a little flat stock left. But if you apply downward pressure, as well as pressure against the fence, you should be okay, but use caution. There should still be a narrow flat after the final pass. Now that we have the blank just about round, you can still see we have our center lines there, showing us where the original faces were. We can actually lay out the location of the spiral pattern. Now, the number of times you divide this surface up, this is 8 inches long. So if you divide it up, let's say you divided it up by 8 and you go every 1 inch, that's a very tight spiral and you'll have a lot of carving to do. This one, for instance, what I've done here, although this is cut off from another piece, I would say it's roughly been divided by 4. So every 2 inches, we've got that spiral pattern. And I think that's a good number to go with. This looks good to me. Any tighter than that, and it's going to be really tricky to do. All right, so what I'm going to do is just take a ruler and mark along this center line. I'm going to mark every 2 inches. So now with all these marks in place, we essentially need to draw a line starting at each one of these 4 points and working our way, making a spiral. And that's what these little tick marks are there for, is to guide each spiral line. So we would start here, draw over to the next one, over to the next one, to the next one, and back to this final point here. Now obviously, that's a little tricky to do freehand, so we're just going to use a little bit of tape, and the tape is going to provide just a connection point between these things that we can manipulate and then trace the lines later on. All right, so let's start this one out here. Helps if you get a little slack. And I'm really just aiming between these 2 points. Just like that. Okay, and then I'm working over to the next point. And if you hold your finger at each one of these areas, you could make fine adjustments as you go, if things are just a little bit off. Okay, and at the end, rip it off and fold it over. Okay. Now we do the same thing for the other 3 positions. Now each piece of tape has 2 sides, but only one of those sides is giving us the line we need. You want to ignore the other side, so only the side that went through your points. That's the one you want to be concerned with. And then you could just use a pen, marker, pencil, whatever, and start tracing along those lines. Now we could remove the tape. We should see a very clear spiral pattern outline. Now we can carve. The bulk of the carving is going to be done using a 1-inch carbide ball mill and this electric die grinder. Now you can get these die grinders in pneumatic varieties too if you've got enough air power to handle it, but I find this electric one works great. Now this ball mill is actually very difficult to find. I ordered it years ago and I can't even help you on a source for it now. If you're looking for something like this, what you may wind up finding are smaller carbide mills like this one. This will still work. This one is pretty aggressive and will do the job, definitely. I don't like it as much as I like this one, but this is what you're going to find if you look on Amazon.com or any other distributor that carries this stuff. You may also find ones with different shapes, like this guy here. Another thing you'll run into are these burrs, these little studded sort of colored ones. They come in a lot of different colors. These are okay, but they tend to clog fairly quickly, which is why I prefer the carbide variety. All right, so let's get started. Before starting, I make some more layout lines, beginning with the max depth line of 3/16 of an inch. And then I extend the lines to mark out the dead center point. With the workpiece in my leg vise, I begin removing material. You need to have a light touch with a tool like this because if the bit catches, it could easily mar the workpiece or worse yet, fly out of your hands. So hold on tight and use a gentle touch. It's a lot like erasing with a pencil eraser, only we're erasing wood. The goal is to remove the material between the lines, working down to our max depth of 3/16 of an inch. As you go deeper, you should also begin to widen the trough. Just be careful not to remove the lines. Now at this stage, everything is pretty much roughed out, and that ball mill leaves a lot of little marks and it's quite uneven in there, so a rasp is the perfect tool for getting inside here and just smoothing everything out and doing the final shaping. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Everything is smooth for the most part. The next step is to smooth everything out to finish quality, so we're going to need some sandpaper to do that. And I like to use these little rubber dealy whackers. I get these from Rockler. I think other places sell them now too. You can also use a piece of dowel stock and just wrap the sandpaper around it. I find these to be a little bit more forgiving and easier to handle. And it's really not a whole lot to it. You're just cleaning up the space in between your peaks. As I move up through my grit progression, it can be kind of difficult to remember where you've sanded and where you haven't. So, you can feel it with your fingers and sometimes tell, but ultimately I like to have a nice visual reminder there. So I just scribble along each one of these spirals, and that lets me know where I've been and where I need to go. Now the final bit of sanding involves breaking the spiral tip here, right, the peaks. You don't want to break it too much because then it just kind of gets this weird dulled look to it, but you certainly don't want it to be sharp. Now this spiral here really was the goal of this lesson, to show you how this was done, and what you do with it is completely up to you. But I'm thinking this is still fairly usable. We can use this as a little candle stand. So in order to do that, we need to have a base and we need to have a top on it. And just to give you a couple of ideas, this is something that I was using before as a test run with the cherry version. I didn't really like the way it looked in square, but someone else may like it. And I just have a little profile around the edge, and you would just have one on the bottom, and you would put one on the top, and then that would just be a nice little candle stand. So that's certainly one idea. I'm going to try something a little bit different this time. I think it looks a little bit better to have a round base and a round top. So I may be wrong. We'll see what happens. But let's cut out some circles, and then we'll put a profile on it at the router table. I tend to use anything I have laying around to draw circles. Once traced, I cut them out at the bandsaw and then clean things up at the belt sander. At the router table, I give each piece a nice round over, but only on one side. Now the bottom is going to be a little bit thicker than the top. The top is only a 1/2 inch. The bottom is going to be 3/4 of an inch, but it consists of two pieces, right? So 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, and these two will be stacked together to give this sort of layered look. Now before I glue them together, I want to mark the center point on this smaller disc here, because I'm going to be drilling a hole there for a dowel. So this is just a shop-made center finder. And if I put a couple of marks here, that'll give me my center. And I'll do the same thing on the bottom. And now I know exactly where I need to drill those holes. But with the center in place, I can now glue these two pieces together. So just put a little bit of glue on the top disc here. And intentionally keep it away from the edges, because I really do not want to deal with squeeze out on this. Now when I put these two together, I'm just going to line it up by eye, put pressure down, and really, of course, you want to make sure the grain is in alignment, because that would look weird if it wasn't. But I'm going to put pressure down, just kind of move this guy around and wiggle it. What that's going to do is force out all of the air. And when you have two flat faces like this, you can create what is called a rub joint, where you don't really even need clamping pressure. And just in case you're a belt and suspenders kind of person, there's a good use for these little spring clamps. Just make sure that it doesn't move the disc when you apply the pressure. Now I'm going to drill a hole in each end of the post for a dowel. I've got a 1/2 inch dowel here that I'm going to cut into small pieces, and that's what's going to hold the bottom and the top onto the post. So just using a 1/2 inch brad point bit, a little bit of blue tape to help me as a depth gauge, and I've got my crosshairs here, and that tells me where to drill. Imagine how tricky it would be to find the perfect center now that we have some of this carving in place. All right, so it's good that we have those there ahead of time. The top and bottom discs get the same treatment, but this time I'm only going to go a 1/4 inch deep. Because the bottom plate is a little bit thicker, I'm actually going to go just a bit deeper. We'll go a 1/2 inch on this one. I'm just going to cut myself two pieces of dowel stock. One is about 1 1/4 inch and the other is about 1 inch. Now we can do a little bit of a test fit, and this is where you'll find out if you need to trim those dowels or maybe drill a little bit deeper. If you see a gap here, that's how you know. That looks pretty good to me. Let's try the other side. And that looks good. So, you have a decision to make. Do you glue it together or do you pre-finish? Now for me, whenever possible, I do like to pre-finish because it just makes life so much easier. And if you have a situation where you can either mask parts of the joinery, because obviously if you get finish on them, it doesn't accept glue as well. In a case like this, we can probably fairly easily keep the finish out of these holes, and that's really where the glue is going to do its work. So I see no reason not to pre-finish this project. What I'm going to use to do it is just some simple Minwax satin polyurethane, diluted with a little bit of mineral spirits so that we can wipe it on. The poly is diluted by about 50% with mineral spirits to make it easier to wipe on with a rag. The wood soaks up the first coat like a sponge, so I tend to reapply the finish a few times in this first application. I'll apply several coats in this fashion over the course of a day or two. As the finish builds, it becomes necessary to use a piece of dowel stock as a handle, which kinda makes it look like a weird corn dog. Great. Now I'm hungry. Now I've applied about 4 coats of that satin poly, and I sanded with 1000 grit in between just to keep everything nice and smooth. And now things are looking pretty good. For a little candle stand like this, it doesn't need a thick, super protective finish, so I think this is good enough, and now we can do the glue up. Now I'm going to use epoxy for the glue up, and the primary reason is the fact that these dowels are just a little bit loose. I really like a tighter fit than this. I mean, it's not bad, and it's only a candle stand, but ultimately I want something that's going to fill any little teeny tiny gaps that are in there. And your standard wood glues, like this type on here, there's not a gap filling glue. If there's a gap, the joint is weak. But epoxy will fill the gap and give you a pretty strong connection there. So that's why I'm going to use it. I'll just make sure I get a good amount in each one of the holes. Now I'm also going to put some on the end grain of each side of the post here. The end grain is probably going to suck up all the glue, and it may not make that much of an impact, but every little bit of extra grip is going to help. Put some epoxy on the dowel. I'm going to drop the dowel into the plate and just give it a twist. That helps work the glue around and make sure that everything is fully seated. Now we just need to put these together. Here we go. Now I'm going to add a clamp, but the only real trick here is we need to make sure that the grain is aligned with the top and the bottom piece, otherwise it just kind of looks weird. But you could do that by eye. Nothing tricky there. And now I can add a clamp. Doesn't need a whole lot of pressure, just enough to hold it in place till that glue dries. Now if you're real careful about it, you shouldn't have any squeeze out. If you do, just take a dry rag and wipe the excess off. The good thing is this material has been pre-finished, so if there's any glue on there, it should actually come off fairly easily without leaving any noticeable marks. So here's the finished product, and what candle stand would be complete without a candle? And it's sized just perfectly for what seems to be a fairly standard candle size. Now the cool thing about this is you could do a lot of different designs with this. Again, the post itself was really just an exercise in carving the spiral, but I'd be interested to see what you guys come up with for ways to incorporate that spiral into something else, and also how you might take a spiral like this and get a base and a top that actually looks really good. Now that's one thing I struggled with, because originally I was thinking square for that shape, but I just couldn't get it to look right. Then I looked online and started to research traditional columns that incorporate spirals like this, and they typically have a round base that then transitions into something square. So that's what I figured, if I'm going to do this, I may as well just go with round instead of the square shape, and it makes a little more sense that way. But a lot of times when you have a design challenge like that, look into the way things have always been done. You know, look into traditional architecture and you might find the answers to what you're looking for. All right, so little candle stand. Hopefully you guys will jump in and make one for yourself, and at the very least, you got to try making this spiral because it's a heck of a lot of fun. Thanks for watching.